Okay, so yeah, welcome to the next Southeast European Studies online platform, which is a platform online kind of seminar that we started to organize as part of the Seafield project, and it's a platform that's open basically to everybody who's interested to attend those online seminars from our partners in the region, but also elsewhere, partners in Germany and elsewhere. And it's part of the Seafield project. So today we have two speakers who are going to present papers about their research. I think we'll start with Slavka Karakusheva, who is a researcher and a teacher at Sofia University and at the Center for Advanced Studies in Sofia. I think Slavka did her master's and BA at Sofia University, when I'm not mistaken, at the Department of Cultural Studies. She's an anthropologist. And she did a PhD on I think mainly on the Turkish population and the connections between Turks living in Turkey and in Bulgaria, using a lot of digital kind of resources, social media, etc. I think that's a very interesting type of research nowadays. But she's, I think, going to talk more about the history of these, let's say, these migration movements between Bulgaria and Turkey between 1925 and the beginning, or before the Second World War. And yeah, the title of her presentation is Patriots and Compatriots, Migrations of Turkish and Muslim Populations from Bulgaria to Turkey in those years. So that's the first presentation. I'll just go on straight away with presenting Sara Žerić, who is a PhD student at the Institute for East and Southeast European Studies, the Leibniz Institute, EOS, in Regensburg. And she's doing her PhD since 2021. And she studied history at the University of Pula up till, before she came to Regensburg. And her topic is also a very interesting one. It's about Gastarbeiter and remittance factories. So Gastarbeiter actually investing money in the former Yugoslavia, or in Yugoslavia at the time, basically building factories and operating a bit as agents of modernization. And that's, I think, also the sort of covers her field. So the title of her presentation is Migration and Development in Socialist Yugoslavia, the Gastarbeiter factories, the devizne fabrike. That's the word that was usually used in this context. So yeah, I would like to give the floor to Slavka, and please start with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Ger, for this kind introduction. Let me know if you're hearing me and if you're able to see the screen as well. Thank you to the University of Regensburg for inviting me for this presentation, and also special thanks to the Center for Advanced Studies in the fellowship, of which I was able to, not to say conduct, but at least to start this research. So, in an article in the first half of the 30s, the Cumhuriyet newspaper, which was more or less the official voice of the Turkish state at the time, published an article suggesting settling the incoming from the Balkans migrants in Thrace, which is the northwestern region of Turkey at the borderland with Greece and Bulgaria, arguing in this article that a wall in Europe must be erected. And then the article continues such as, they will cultivate the soil, benefit the country, and they will be men, compatriots, who shed their blood for the fatherland at the right time. Empty lands are good for absolutely nothing, because one day they will fall into foreign hands. At the same time, various documents circulating between the various Bulgarian institutions during the period mention that as long as the displacement of Turkish population to Turkey is not widespread and under the control of the Bulgarian state, it is desired and even imposed by our national interests, which dictate the decrease of the Turkish population in Bulgaria. So my project aims to study the historical dynamics of the migrations of Turkish and Muslim populations from Bulgaria to Turkey in the period between 1925 and 1939, analyzed within the larger framework of the two nation-state population policies, state and nation building processes and practices of ethnic and demographic engineering. The study investigates the simultaneous involvement of both countries in similar measures and their engagement in developing similar strategies to homogenize the previously demographically heterogeneous territories along ethnic, religious, cultural, and linguistic lines. As many of the sources are still to be proceeded and much work is still to be done, today I'm going to present just some initial insights, intuitions, ideas, and mainly examples in an attempt to show the direction in which I'm trying to lead this research. I'll start with a very brief presentation of the legislative framework, which allows these migrations. So in October 1925, just a few years after the end of World War I and shortly after the proclamation of the Turkish Republic, Bulgaria and Turkey signed a treaty of friendship. According to its provisions, both countries agreed not only to guarantee protection of the other one's minority in their lands, but also to allow the voluntary emigration of the members of these minorities to the territory of the other one. This was the first agreement between the two states that aimed to legalize, govern, and control population resettlements, which was implemented in practice. It set the grounds for mainly Turkish and Muslim migrations through their common border for the following decades. Two laws on settlement regulating the acceptance of refugees were adopted during the period under analysis here in Turkey. According to the first law from 1926, as refugees and potential citizens could not be accepted people who did not belong to Turkish culture. A memorandum on settlement issued a few months later defined more precisely who were the people considered belonging to Turkish culture, apart from the Turks, for whom, according to the authorities, it was obvious, but the other people were Pomaks, Bosnians, Tatars. According to the following law on settlement from 1934, immigrant was a category referring to people from Turkish descent and people bounded to Turkish culture. In the debates on the law proposal at the Turkish Grand National Assembly, the Minister of Interior of that time, Şükrü Kaya, expressed the intention of the government as following. This law will create a country speaking with one language, thinking in the same way, and sharing the same sentiment. Again, a following circular issued by the General Directorate of Settlement a few months later provides detailed information about the different ways of treatment of potential immigrants and obviously prospective citizens. Scholars such as Suner Çağatay or Erol Ülker, among others, of course, define this treatment as a hierarchy of acceptance constructed around racial, ethnic, religious, linguistic, and cultural principles. The highest position was taken by people of Turkish race whose mother and only tongue was Turkish, and people perceived again as bounded to Turkish culture, such as Pomaks, Bosnians, Tatars, and others. The second position was reserved for other Sunni Muslim populations considered assimilable into the Turkish culture. And then a third group of Muslims, Jews and Christians certainly, were perceived and would be treated as foreigners. They could not be admitted as immigrants or provided with Turkish nationality. These two groups were not only treated differently, but if accepted, were also settled, planned to be settled differently. Very briefly about the numbers. These are, of course, some assumptions about the numbers of the migrants during the period, because first of all, it is difficult to trace the exact numbers. There were different forms of migrations, legal and illegal, and there are significant differences in the numbers provided by the authorities of both states and even within the institutions of one and the same state. But we can estimate a number of around 200,000 migrants. We can observe also an increase in the migration flows after 1934, when the mentioned law on settlement was adopted and the Turkish state implemented different settlement policies and practices, and when a military coup d'etat was committed in Bulgaria. As you can see in the numbers here after 1934, despite of the differences in the sources, there is a certain increase. So how was the process organized? Legally and illegally. The legal one. To be allowed to migrate, people needed to provide evidence that they had paid all taxes to the Bulgarian state and municipalities, all debts to banks and private individuals, and military taxes for the men who had not completed military service. Once all required taxes were paid, and in many cases, due to the extreme poverty, this was possible only after selling their property, people were issued a passport and an exit visa by the regional governors in Bulgaria, with which they could apply for entrance visa in the Turkish embassy and the consulates throughout the country. If they were a bit wealthier, with the rest of the money, they were able to take with them and later sell in Turkey cattle or different products such as sugar or rice or textile, because export of currency was not allowed. Many of them, however, were too poor to cover all required taxes and debts even after selling their property, usually consisting of small pieces of land, in which cases people wrote requests to the state authorities to ask for debt and tax forgiveness and for cost-free migrant passports. Various archival documents preserved in the archives illustrate the concerns of the Bulgarian authorities that the state was not able to benefit much of this social class of immigrants, and the disappointment that the wealthier Turks were less interested in migration. When in 1937, the Ministry of Interior and Public Health distributed a circular that passports and exit visas could be received upon leaving the land in possession of the Bulgarian state, it explained it with the intention to free it's a quote, to free the municipalities and the state from a population that is only a burden and does not bring any income to the treasury. Another option was the illegal migration, and again, the archives, in this case, the Ministry of War and the Ministry of Interior and Public Health, reported many cases of caught people at the borders and even more successful migration due to corruption at all administrative levels and at the various institutions. The Bulgarian authorities were not very much concerned about the illegality of the border crossings or the situation of the people, but of the fact that the illegal refugees were defrauding the treasury or were destroying the good image of the country by claiming that they were victims of violence in Bulgaria in order to get easier acceptance in Turkey. In one such case of illegal migration in November 1934, the Bulgarian embassy in Romania reported that recently many Bulgarian citizens and even whole families from Turkish origin had been found by the local authorities accommodated in the homes of the Turkish population in the border regions in Romania, waiting for an opportunity to migrate to Turkey. The headquarters of the Romanian border control would return all who had entered the country in this way back to Bulgaria. The report of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Denominations stated that the ministry, a quote, believes that in general, Turks who have illegally left the territory should not be allowed to return. On the other hand, an outright refusal would find no sufficient justification, as they, until that moment, remain Bulgarian citizens. It is therefore desirable to make known both among those Turks who have fled to Romania and among their relatives in the regions in southeastern Bulgaria, that fleeing abroad in an illegal manner entails the penalties of the law, and that consequently those who return will be immediately arrested and convicted. In this way, a mass influx of unemployed and destitute people back to Bulgaria will be prevented, and at the same time, the recent attempts of Turks to escape to Romania illegally will be put to an end. So the settlement to Turkey. Arriving to Turkey, refugees were accepted as either free migrants, serbest göçmenler, who were given the right to settle wherever they want, provided that they did not seek help from the government, or as settled migrants, iskanlı göçmenler, who were settled with the help of the government, but accepting the conditions of living in the settlement area for a certain period of time. We can trace two periods of migration flows and settlement policies, one from for this particular period that is analyzed in this research. One is from 1926 to 1934, and another one from 1934 to 1939. In the first period, the budget opportunities of the Turkish Republic were quite limited, and the state mobilized and directed all of its available resources for the settlement of the refugees that arrived after the exchange of the populations with Greece. For this reason, in this period, most immigrants from other Balkan countries, including also Bulgaria, were accepted as free migrants, who upon entering the country had to sign a letter of commitment that they did not request housing or other assistance from the government. And who had to bring some financial means to sustain their living in Turkey. The government often did not interfere with the location of their settlement, and they were given the freedom to choose where to settle, the majority of whom chose the fertile soils that were not very different in terms of climate and flora and fauna, region in Thrace and the Marmara Basin. In fact, the system did not work as desired, as usually happens, and the majority of immigrants did not have sufficient financial means and were in need of state aid. So reports from the archives in the end of the 20s mention cases of support by the Turkish state in terms of providing houses, small pieces of land, or seeds for agricultural needs. In the beginning of the 30s, the dramatically depopulated and uncultivated land, particularly in Anatolia, was a topic in the public debate. The size of the population was discussed in relation to the agricultural production, the economic growth, and more generally, to the survival. It's a quote from an article, one of those articles that you see on the screen, to the survival against the highly populated and advanced technological nations of tomorrow. According to various authors in the time, the desired population growth could be achieved either by immediate rapid increase of the birth rate or by immigration of people from Turkish origin from the Balkans, as suggested, for example, by Yashar Nabi Nair, who himself was a migrant from Skopje, in a book he wrote in 1936 entitled The Balkans and the Turkishness, in which he described in details the social and economic benefits of accepting such immigrants. The latter was a topic also in the political debates as well. Discussions in the Turkish Grand Assembly defended the necessity to bring 2 to 2.5 million more Turks to Anatolia. As the primary debt of a nation, the highest duty of a government is to assure the unity of a nation within its country, referring obviously to those Muslim Turkish populations that remained outside of the state borders. Adopting the law on settlement in 1934 allowed planning, regulating and organizing the migration flows. If we look at the numbers again, if we look at the numbers again, we'll see that the vast majority of immigrants after 1934 were accepted as settled immigrants. They were settled with the assistance of the state, obliged to live in the settlement area for a period of 10 years. The majority were supported with houses, land, and products, and some of them, accommodated in certain zones, received tax forgiveness for a period of 5 years. In 1935 and each year after that, until 1939, the Turkish embassy in Sofia informed the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the yearly quota of migrants the Turkish Republic was ready to accept from Bulgaria. The number was 10,000 per year. Thus, both states took the migration flows under their own control, negotiating between themselves the whole process. The numbers of migrants and the numbers of those wishing and preparing to migrate significantly increased, so both countries had to engage various of their institutions in the coordination of the resettlement. The Bulgarian state, for example, convened a special interinstitutional commission, including representatives of different ministries, to discuss and propose measures for organizing the resettlement. In the opinion of the state representatives participating in these meetings, the migration desire was a result of, one, the extreme poverty, two, the penetration of Kemalist propaganda in Bulgaria, and three, the agitation for emigration by ethnic Bulgarians who were calculating their own profit after the emigration of the ethnic Turks. A transcript of one of the meetings holds records of the speech of the Chief Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Denominations of the time, who says, the Turkish population in Bulgaria, instead of decreasing, is constantly increasing. It is already 1/10 of the total population, around 720,000 people, regardless of the POMAX. Such a national minority, he says, weighs on the Bulgarian state organism. There is a motion for emigration among the Turkish population in Bulgaria, and as long as the displacement does not become widespread, it is tolerated by our government, as the problem is how to get rid of this enormous minority mass. The Commission reached the conclusion that a gradual, slow, arranged, meaningfully distributed and well-controlled emigration of the Turks from Bulgaria cannot harm our national economy nor affect some vital interests of the Bulgarian state, but on the contrary, it could mitigate this crisis in the agricultural livelihood, which is due to the lack of land, by organizing under direct or indirect control the settlement of Bulgarians in the places vacated by the Turks. A few words about the ethnic differentiation within the religious category of Muslims. The Muslim population in Bulgaria consisted mainly of three groups of people, people of Turkish origin, Slavonic language-speaking Muslims, known as POMAX or called Bulgarian Mohammedans in the document, and Roma Muslims. Although the Treaty of Friendship refers to the broader category of Muslims from Bulgaria, the three Muslim groups were treated differently by both Bulgarian and the Turkish state. So first, the POMAX. The official discourse of the Bulgarian state considered the POMAX as ethnic Bulgarians who were forcibly converted to Islam during the Ottoman rule and whose emigration should be prevented. In many available reports by various institutions, the agents of the state described their willingness to emigrate at the first possible opportunity, mainly due to the terrible misery, extreme poverty, and the hunger they lived in. The state officials, however, emphasized that such emigration is not desired and not allowed by the state, and that they, as following the discourse of the time, originally ethnic Bulgarians should be integrated to the Bulgarian nation. With regard to the Bulgarian Mohammedans, says the document, possible obstacles should be made in order to preserve this population and integrate it into our country, because it can hardly be replaced with immigrants from other parts of the country. So as a result, no passports were issued to POMAX during the period, and their only option to emigrate was the legal one. An instruction of the Ministry of War stated that the Bulgarian Mohammedans are not considered Turks and keeping them in the country is desired, but as you can see, they are infiltrated by Turkish propaganda and keeping them will be useless. An example of how these politics materialized in practice was a man who wrote a request to the Bulgarian embassy in Istanbul asking the authorities to allow immigration of his two children, a boy and a girl at the age of 14 and 10. Emigration of the children was not allowed by the Bulgarian state, as according to the opinion of the authorities, it would set a bad precedent. because it is possible, says the document, that other similar cases appear. Pomak people who emigrated in one way or another outside the borders, who later demand that their children be allowed to emigrate. The emigration of these children is inconvenient because it would encourage others to emigrate. The children have inherited properties left to them by their father and live with their uncle. In Turkey, many politicians and intellectuals regarded Pomaks as Turks before their immigration due to their Muslim religion, and when they were successfully integrated into public life as loyal members of the society. However, their non-Turkish identity was highlighted when these immigrants spoke Pomak or Bulgarian language, for which a few articles in local press alarmed in the 30s, or were perceived as a threat to the social and political order, particularly if settled at the border regions with Bulgaria. Both laws on settlement did not allow emigration of gypsies to Turkey. The Bulgarian state did not obey, the Bulgarian state did obey more or less this condition and did not issue passports and exit visa to Roma Muslims until 1937, when the Ministry of Interior found an opportunity to get rid of them again, allowing immigration of Gypsy Mohammedans. Passports and exit visas were allowed to all of them who, with their unpleasant appearance, begging, lies, and thefts, create trouble for the authorities and bore the population and foreigners who visit our country, says the document. In the application for poverty issued by the municipalities and in the passports, gypsies should appear as Muhammadan Turks because gypsies are not accepted in the Turkish state. I don't have much information about how Roma Muslims were treated by the Turkish state as immigrants. Only one report by one police inspector from the Bulgarian archives who claims that a case of such illegal immigration and that they were pushed back to the territory of Bulgaria, but this needs further attention. The last section of my presentation concerns geographical nationalization and the relations between migration, national territories, and ethnicities. The authorities in Bulgaria, in various institutional reports, expressed concerns that certain regions, mainly in northeastern Bulgaria, were producing migration flows more than other regions. For example, southern central Bulgaria. These concerns were related to the geographical location of these regions. The latter, southern central Bulgaria, was intensively populated with Turkish populations and located in close proximity to the Bulgarian-Turkish border. The already mentioned Interinstitutional Commission, for example, recommended emigration to be channelized in a way so that to be developed mainly from the border region, which should be settled by a purely Bulgarian population. And in the regions located more than 25 kilometers from the border, emigration should be limited to a minimum. A proposal with such recommendations and instructions was also prepared by the Ministry of War, according to which the state should differentiate its policies and attitudes, such as to the Turks whose residence is more than 25 kilometers away from the border, who wish to emigrate, this desire to be cooled down. To the Turks from the border areas, especially to those living southern of the river, if they do not wish to emigrate, a desire to emigration to be aroused. To all intelligent Turks, wherever they live, if they have no intention of to encourage them to emigrate. In Turkey, the few times mentioned already law on settlement from 1934 divided the territory in three main zones subject to different politics. So type 1 was where concentration of Turkish population and demographic nationalization was desired due to the predominantly non-Turkish speaking inhabitants or the strategic location of these areas. Type 2 are areas with a stable Turkish language speaking majority reserved for relocation of non-Turkish population whose assimilation into Turkish culture was desired. And type 3 is where settlement was prohibited due to various reasons. During the study period, and particularly after the adoption of this law, Eastern Thrace and Eastern Anatolia received higher number of immigrants compared to other territories. In November 1934, in a debate in the Turkish Grand National Assembly, the already mentioned Minister of Interior answered a question of a member of the parliament, providing information about the number of the migrants and the efforts of the Turkish state to accommodate them. According to it, in the period between 1st of June 1933 and 1st of November 1934, the highest number of immigrants in comparison to other countries, almost 10,000 people, were from Bulgaria. According to the data he provided, 52% of all immigrants for the period were accommodated in this particular Thracian region. Cumhuriyet, the already mentioned newspaper, published a series of articles in which populating Thrace with migrants from the Balkans was discussed as a primary state task. In one article, the newspaper asks the rhetorical question if there is a need to explain the importance of Thrace for Turkey. Thrace is the last piece of the big Turkish state in Europe. Thrace, the hinterland of Istanbul. Thrace, the opening gate of Turkey towards the West and the civilization. Thrace, a source of wealth with its fertile land. The defense area of Istanbul, the Bosphorus, and so on. The Republican administration have decided to double the population of Thrace and to place Turkish immigrants from the old Rumelia here to improve Thrace and to make it a paradise. Another article, I'll skip it saving some time, but it says the same thing, like Thrace has to be populated first with migrants from the Balkans because it is going to be erected kind of a wall in Europe. So I go to the end of the presentation with some concluding remarks. This research, although still at a very initial stage, examines the nationhood imaginary and the different government strategies towards desired and undesired subjects, categorized in terms of a national majority and minorities, privileged or deprived on the basis of ethnic and religious criteria, and at the end treated differently according to the different assumptions that the ruling elites have for their loyalty or disloyalty, reliability or unreliability towards the national cause. The study demonstrates how the ruling elite, different politicians, members of ministries, power and security structures, diplomats, administrators in the institutions contributed to problematizing ethnic differences, to redefining citizenship boundaries, to changing the demographic structures, and to settling the agenda of the homogenizing processes through resettlement of populations. The agents of the states were those who created preferences for certain religious, ethnic, cultural, and linguistic characteristics at the expense of others, according to their visions for the desired ethnic composition of the population, and decided which citizens qualify for full membership to the national club and which do not. The study period is a good illustration of a particular form of nation building, one based on population politics and practices of ethnic engineering. It is important also, this period, because it sets a pattern of state-driven migrations. Understanding this pattern may allow a comparison of the migration waves of Turkish populations from Bulgaria to Turkey during the course of the 20th century, presumably trace the points of intersections and provide grounds for further investigations of continuities and discontinuities of state politics. Thank you very much for the attention. I stop here.
Yeah, thank you very much, Slavka. So I think this was a very interesting insight in, let's say, the history of trans-border migrations that continued, let's say, over the rest of the century to a certain extent, or the 80s, for example. And I think it puts those more recent developments in some sort of historical perspective, which I think is really, really important. So yeah, I would like to open the floor for a number of questions. We will reserve about 10-15 minutes for that, and then go on with Sara's presentation. So are there any remarks, any questions? We have to move on, and we have the second speaker. I already introduced Sara. We know what she's going to talk about. I'm not going to repeat that. So please, Sarah, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Just let me share my screen. Okay, I hope you can see.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, thank you for having me here today, and thank you, Ger, for a great introduction. So I will not also repeat and tell what I am doing for my research projects. So yeah, devizne fabrike or Gastarbeiter factories or remittances factories are one of my key focus for my PhD project. And I will start directly with one of my case studies from Patriots. So today I will be focused only on Patriots. Don't worry, I will not read all of the quote. No one is fan of the reading of big quotes. I will just say what is the thing here. So we have a migrant from Patriots who first was part of internal migration. So he couldn't find a job during the 60s in Patriots, and he moved to Križevci, where he worked on construction company. However, he was not satisfied even there. And one day, the boss asked all of the workers from the construction who would like to go to Germany and work there. And of course, since the earnings were better at that time in Germany, he, as many other Yugoslav people in the late 60s, went to work abroad, and he actually worked in Nuremberg in the company Leonard Moll for a couple of years. And then one day, one guy came to the factory and he said, "Would you lend the factory Tigar foreign currency for the new machines if you got a job?" Of course, he agreed to that. He invested his remittances into the new plant of Tigar factory, and he came back to the Pirot. And once he came back to the town, he said to his wife, I quote now, "I'm coming back. I'm finally be with you and the kids forever." So Pirot didn't have typical migrant story as some of my other case studies. As you can see from the number, population in 71 and 81 was almost 70,000 people who were living in Pirot, and at the same time around 1,000 people emigrated, which is really, really a low number and not that much. However, we cannot escape from the fact that people also migrated from the town. As we can see, they migrated to Germany, but also to the USA. So just to show where the Pirot is, if maybe someone doesn't know, we can see on the map the red spot, not the Belgrade, but the other red spot in the south of the Serbia, really close to the border of Bulgaria. Here is it. And actually, while I was in the Pirot recently, a lot of the people told me we are appendix in the Croatian Slijepo Crijevo of the country. I believe you don't have such a thing to say in English, but when we say something like this in our languages, we mean that something is really, really hard to reach, but also that they are feeling unequal in order to some other parts of Serbia, which we will see later was really important for my research also. So just to say some history of migration from Pirot. So according to the census from 71 and 81, mostly people migrated to Germany, but also to France, to Austria, and to some other European countries. However, what was really typical for the migrants from Pirot, that some of them migrated to those countries because factories from Pirot, especially Tigar, had that so-called joint ventures with some other factories in West Europe, and the people went to work on that factory for some kind of specialization for a couple of years, and then the goal, it should be to come back to the Pirot. Since I will talk a lot about the Tigar factory, I want to introduce you just more about the factory itself. So factory originally was founded in the 1935 as a workshop for the production of rubber products and all types of rubber footwear. After the war, of course, it was nationalized, and then in the 1955, it was established as a car factory, and finally in 1966 as a factory of technical tires. So as I said, a lot of the people from Tirot went to work aboard as a part of the joint ventures with some other factories. With Tigar, that was a case already since the early 1960s. However, I have an example from the 1970 when a group of 80 workers from Tigar went to work in Germany, and they had a contract only for 1 year. Later, representatives of the trade union from Tigar factory visited the workers just to see conditions in which they are working on. Migrants from Tigar factory and other migrants from the town were usually coming back during the New Year's holiday. That was really typical for all of the Gastarbeiters. And at one of the meeting between Tigar factory representatives and the employers from aboard on 1971, between Zoran Milosavljevic and the other employers, one of the employer asked one really simple questions. I quote, "Can workers who went to work abroad through the bureau and before that did not have permanent employment in the country pledge their earnings in a foreign currency for the expansion of the Tigar factory, but that they have priority when Tigar hires new workers?" So yeah, during the 1971, at that meeting, it was discussed about the expansion of the factory. And that was really important because in the same year, Tigar started to have a new cooperation between with the Zastava factory from Kragujevac, and the production of car tires should have been doubled. However, in order to secure the money for the realization of this kind of cooperation, it was decided issuance of a foreign currency loan through the participation of workers employed on the temporary work aboard to secure jobs. So how was happening from the idea to realization? This idea in Pirot happened only 2 years after the first idea in Imotski, in Arjano, where Pionirka factory was actually a first Gastarbeiter factory, not only in Yugoslavia, but in this part of the Europe. And because of that, it was really well legally regulated, because in the 1971, the law on boats was taken, and based on that, the agree on the conditions under which labor organization can issue bonds payable in foreign currency was made in 1972. It was really important that everything is according to the laws, because we are talking about self-management system and the money which is coming from the capitalist country. However, remittances at that time were really, really important for Yugoslav economy. However, in reality, there was really no connection between migrants from Imotski and Pirot when it comes to the all of those making a new remittances factory. When I just started my research, I thought maybe there was some kind of connection between migrants from Imotski and Pirot back in Germany. However, this is not a case. The thing is, this is one of the projects of Employment Bureau, and the main goal was to bring back migrants and also to get some remittances. And yeah, there was no connection between migrants themselves. So every interest migrant for period who wanted to get a job had to pay at least 30,000 new dinars in foreign currency, and that depend on family financial position, number of employees in the family, and qualification. And of course, main purpose of this loan was procurement of important equipment for the new factory of radial tires. So finally, a historical decision in Pirot was made on September 20, 1972, when Factory Workers' Council made a decision to register a loan in foreign means of the payment, and the members of Tigar Workers' Council agree on the adoption of these decisions. The new remittances plant was finally opened 2 years later in 1974. So the new plant employed 1,000 people, and out of that, every fifth was a returning guest worker. So 200 migrants decided to invest their remittances and go, and on the other hand, go back to the period, which was a really important chance for them. So what actually remittances factory is and how it works, I want to introduce you deeply more about this issue also. So where we are working, when we are talking about those kind of factories, we have 3 key figures, and that are organization of associated labor, bank, and a worker. So what was the role of organization of associated labor? It should start an initiative to create a new job and also to create an investive program. It should offer a job, conclude a contract with the workers, refers workers to the bank to deposit funds, and finally, organization of associated labor should realize the investment plan. The other side, worker enter contract with the organization of association labor, make a fixed term funds in the bank, and at the end employ in the organization of associated labor, and the bank collect the fund from the workers and just improve a loan. However, in May this year, together with Professor Brunbauer, I had a chance to go deeply with the problematic of remittances factories, since we made a talk with Mladen Vedriš. Mladen Vedriš was one of the main person who was researching during the 70s the phenomenon of remittances factories. And thanks to him, we found some new information that we couldn't find in the archives or in the contemporary studies. What was really interesting is that this idea actually came from a similar project in Rimini, Italy, because they had also a strong regional depopulation, as was the case in Imotski, where the first remittances factory was established, and that was just a project to stop this kind of depopulation and to bring back migrants together with their remittances. However, we also found it out, and I was not surprised with this fact, that at the end everything depended on enthusiasm of the local community, and many projects about remittances factory were not actually at the end realized, because they just had idea at the beginning, but they didn't have support of the politicians, and then at the end they didn't have any enthusiasm to bring this kind of the project to the end. Let's bring back to the case of Pirot. At the meetings of the League of the Communists of Pirot municipality, this way of, let's say, buying jobs, but it wasn't buying a job, was really criticized, because not all migrants who wanted to invest money managed to get a job. Just to be clear, so no one didn't invest money and then at the end didn't have a job. So everyone who invested got a job. However, about 50 migrants from Western Europe, America, and Australia were rejected just because factory wanted to choose the best workers for this kind of a project. In June this year, I started to do my field work in Pirot. And actually, my first stop was Association of Pensioners from Tigar. And there I was welcomed. With around 10 people who used to work in Tigar and who also before that migrated to Germany or some other country. However, when I was started talking about my project and what I'm researching, I was really surprised because they were not familiar with the term devizne fabrika. They didn't know what is that at all. And because of that, they believed that Tigar was not part of that kind of a project. But the thing is, they just didn't have knowledge about it. Some of them or their family members of co-workers invested their remittances in the factory and got a job in the factory. So yeah, we can see that they invested, they were part of it, they got a job, but they didn't know how to call it. However, it was really, really well written about it in the local newspapers and in the factories' newspapers, but themselves, they just didn't have a name for that. All of those people from Association of Pensioners who I spoke used to work in Germany. So that was that case of joint venture between Tigar and another factory. Some of them used to work in the Schoeps tire factory, which was close to the Mannheim. And some of them used to work in Leonard Moll factory, same as the guide from the beginning of the presentation, which I quote. However, what I didn't know that some of them invested even in the later years between 1976 and 78. What I found it out from the newspapers that they invested only in the period between 70 and 74. However, obviously factory needed the remittances and after the opening of a new plant. So some of them came from Germany even in the later 70s. This is a Tigar factory settlement in Pirot. It was made according to the plan of Manchester Industrial Complex, because architect who made a plan for this settlement before that went to Manchester just to get some kind of inspiration. And as we can see from the picture, it really is typical industrial settlement. On the left side, we can see not only the houses, but the buildings, which are the parts of how they call it New Tigar settlement, which was made in the late socialism. And on the right picture, it is just a yard of one of the houses. However, what was really interesting for me is this thing, which I don't know how to say on Croatian, not to say on English, but I highlight made in Germany. This is obviously really long here in this yard, and it was just interesting for me to see how those, let's say, made in Germany relations are still living here today physically, but people don't know anything about it, actually. A lot of them heard that story from me for the first time. This is just one of the buildings in the new factory settlement. This is the supermarket in the Tigar settlement, and unfortunately, as we can see, it's not in good condition. And this is basically the picture of Pirot today. However, while I was working on the industrial settlement of Tigar factory, I had a chance to meet one married couple, Tomislav and Mirjana. They are now in their late 80s, and both of them work in Germany in wood industry, and they invested 7,000 Deutsche Marks in the 70s, and thanks to that, they got a chance to go back to the Pirot. When I asked them about a life in Germany, they said to me, we had a nice life in Germany, and after invested our money, we had even better life in Pirot. This man talked about this kind of investments with a really pleasure, and it was one of the rare people with who I spoke and who knew what I'm speaking about. And he said that this was a really good thing for him and for his wife, because he invested 7,000 Deutsche Marks, but he got back more money after a couple of years in dinars, because he got 10% of commission. And yes, both of them got a job place in a factory. One of my other case is case of Svetlana. I spoke with Svetlana about her parents. So she's a daughter of Gastarbeiters from Pirot, and both of the parents work in Germany. Her father worked in the tire factory and the mother was a cleaner. Svetlana visited them often during the summer holidays, and back then she also worked as a cleaner together with her mother. She was in a high school then, but she said it was really good opportunity for her to earn some money that she could spend only for herself. And her parents invested remittances into the factory, and both parents got a job in the factory. On the right picture is one of the complex in their yard. So this is something that her father built during the vacation in Pirot, which is really interesting to me, just to show how people didn't stop to work when they were coming back to the town. They were still doing some kind of construction, and housing is one of the obvious examples of that. However, when I was speaking with her more and more, this interview opened for me question of emancipation, because again, I have a case of a woman who got job place in a factory. And why I'm saying about this? Because while I was reading a newspaper, I could read only about the men who got a workplace in a factory. However, my first case study, Pionirka factory, was basically only who employed women, since that was a textile factory, and it was a really important thing for emancipation women of Imotski and the whole Imotski region. And even when we talked with Mladen Vedrish, he also emphasized this as a really important question for Imotski. So I thought, okay, in Pirot is going to be something else, because I could read only about the men who were working in the factories, but in the case it's not like this, because obviously a lot of the women also got job place into the factory thanks to the remittances of their husbands or some other family members. However, in Pirot, not everyone wanted to talk with me. People were really suspicious. Who am I? What do I want? During some small talks, I realized that there was much more investment than people from Pirot think. And as I said, many more women were employed that was known. However, these people were asked something for the first time after a long period, and I can go back now from what I said when I show you the map, that Pirot is Slijepo Crijevo of the country, that people are feeling unequal. So even those people who didn't want to speak about investments and the migrant story and migration and everything what happened around Tigar factory, they wanted to speak with me about socio-political situation in the town and in the country, just because for the first time someone was there to listen them. However, complaining about the current socio-political situation in Serbia, it's a result of running the country for the last 30 years, not only because of the current situation in Serbia. And I must say, unfortunately, this led to the failure of making several interviews. I could do it much more, but people didn't wanted to speak with me. Maybe I will have another chance in future. Who knows? But these are at the moment only speculations. I think this picture shows the best current situation in Pirot. As we can see, door to door, we have Socialist Party of Pirot, and on the other door, there are this is a place of the party movement of restoration of Kingdom of Serbia. So two really different political parties basically share a place. And of course, Serbian Progressive Party has also a big role at the moment in the city, but even much more bigger in the villages. And the villages people were actually important to me because a lot of them from the villages migrated and invested. But yeah, I didn't have chance this time to speak with them. This is how factory looks today. It's much more bigger. It doesn't fit only in the one picture. Tigar Tires today is a part of the Michelin company, and I had a chance to speak with some people who are employed in the higher position of the factory. Same as most of the people in Pirot. They were also hear this story for the first time. They couldn't help me, but they had a really good willing to help me, and they tried to find a factory archive. However, that was also successful because they don't know at the moment where the factory archive is, because a couple of years ago, factory was moving from the old complex to this new complex, and it's lost at the moment. However, with conversation with them, I'm pretty sure if once they found it, that they will contact with me. However, they are much more interested in some other stories from the history, such as Tigar Americas and cooperation between Tigar and USA. And I hope this part of Tigar history will also in the future get bigger attention, both from the local people and from the people who are in the factory today. So just to conclude, so all told, the migrants from Pirot were part of the Yugoslav remittance factory project. This research at the moment showed that there was an unrelated case with some other factories. However, this is still work in the progress, and in 1 year, maybe I will have some other conclusion. There are also some great similarities. The investment process is the same, and even the lack of investment in later decades is the same, because there was a lack of cooperation between migrants, factory managers, and the local politicians. And the phenomenon of devizne fabrike obviously is appeared in various parts of Yugoslavia in the 1970s, but it's interpreted differently today. And nevertheless, I hope that this research will contribute to understand of this phenomenon, not only from scientific side, but also that the actors themselves will realize the importance of their investment for the local development and for migration history of the region of Pirot in general, because at the end, everything is about the small people and how they contribute. Thank you for the listening.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk and some insight into a local one case that you are dealing with, because you're dealing with, I think, half a dozen of cases, I believe, or something in that range, isn't it? Yeah. And it's the first time I've heard about this example, which I found extremely interesting to hear this particular story, which is you know, a bit different than I expected, actually. So I have some questions, but I am just curious first to ask whether any people in the audience who have questions.